you very much, Ruben, for the introduction and for the invitation, and to everybody. Hope everyone's hanging in there. And I've been looking forward to this since I was invited, and it's nice to see some new faces and have a chance to talk about design a little bit. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can make this full screen. Okay, can I get some thumbs up if everyone can see this okay?
Yeah, sure.
A few people I have. Okay. Great. Okay, so I'd like to talk today about some of our work, and specifically introduce in general what we do and how we approach our projects, and then really talk in more specificity about three of the projects that I think cover the range of work that we do. If my internet's not so reliable sometimes, so just start waving your arms if you can't hear me or you lose me. You know, we're all used to this by now. So, but please consider this informal, and I guess send Ruben your questions, and we can also talk some at the end. Port is a practice I founded with my partner, Christopher Marcinkoski, about, I don't know, almost 10 years ago. And we really set out to establish the practice with an urban and public realm focus. So we're technically, educated as architects. We're both licensed architects. I teach architecture at the University of Michigan School of Architecture, or urban design rather. And but my partner Chris teaches landscape and urban design at the University of Pennsylvania School of Landscape Architecture and Design. So, and I head our Chicago office, and he heads the Philadelphia office, but we work together as one office in two locations. Most of our projects aren't in Chicago or Philadelphia, and so our team is always just working together wherever the project resides. But rather than focusing, I guess, on architecture and urbanism and landscape and interiors, and we just chose public space. And that means we really do cross, as you know, public space spans architecture and landscape and urban design. And everyone who in our office really has often multiple degrees, whether in landscape and architecture or planning design, but that we really approach each project in a kind of multidisciplinary way that allows us, we've kind of grown the practice to focus on, again, urban focus, not just landscape focus or let's say architecture. And so the types of projects that we typically take on fall in these three big categories. Really, there's urban strategy. And so that's kind of big master planning, visioning, frameworks, urban design, master plans. And then public spaces, those would be like permanent public space projects. So design and construction of a plaza or a playground or a park, a waterfront, a streetscape, and then temporary. And that's a kind of smallest piece of what we do, but often we find ourselves designing for events or pavilions or installations, but still that are publicly oriented. Okay, did I break up?
No, sorry. Are you sharing something? Because we're just looking at a black screen.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me try this again.
There you go.
Did you see this? Did you
see
this
slide at all? We can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is all you missed. There was this, and then it just says new formats of urban space, and then I was explaining this. Can everyone see this now?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know how we dropped off there. Sorry about that. So these are the three project types that I was describing. So the urban strategy, and then kind of the proportion of time in the office or effort in the office. So the temporary events, pavilions, and installations are kind of a smaller piece of what we work on, but if they're public, we still take them on. So just to give a quick overview, at the scale of strategy frameworks, these take the urban strategy can be large frameworks like a visioning and strategy project we did at the University of Chicago on the left, or the Goose Island in Chicago on the right, where you're looking at large areas of the city and working on frameworks or strategies for those. We completed a project on the left for the New York Regional Plan Association that looked at a couple thousand miles of outside of New York. They're kind of near nature, so to speak. Or on the right, an exhibition speculating about the future of Chicago's Park and Boulevard system for the Chicago Architecture Center. But these are big urban propositions or often planning projects that are sometimes a client, but sometimes also an exhibition. In the public space category, we're working on a couple large parks right now, or I guess several, but they range from 200 acres to, or I guess 100 acres to about 300 acres. So on the left, we're working on one in Tennessee that's under construction and one in Arkansas on the right. Or also in a more urban context, could be a public space that takes the form as an urban plaza on the left, or a streetscape in Cleveland on the right. And down to the scale of the temporary, this on the left for the most recent Chicago Architecture Biennial, we designed some urban furniture. And on the right, we designed a series of these pavilions or entry pavilions to a series of events in Chicago. I guess that's labeled incorrectly in the bottom right, but that's for Chicago Loop Alliance Activate events. And Augustine attended one of these a couple of years ago. And then finally, the image that was on the poster, this was a temporary pavilion we designed for Chicago Ideas Week on the left in 2015, and a pavilion we designed for the University of Chicago Place Lab on the right. So that's a kind of range of projects and how our projects land from, okay, sorry, I have two little boys here. So, okay, you gotta go back upstairs. Okay, I'll make sure to take care of that.
You're not even saying it was.
Hang on one second.
That's all right.
Okay, we had one boy bite another boy. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's an overview of the types of projects that we do. I wanted to talk about three in more detail that span across these scales to just talk more deeply about our process and how we approach these urban projects. The first is called the Lakeview Low-Line. The title sounds familiar. Obviously, it's a kind of take on the New York High Line, where you're repurposing elevated rail tracks and walking above them. This is a project, can you still see my screen? Okay, where we're looking at the space underneath the rail tracks, the elevated rail tracks, so the low line. So this is the Lakeview Low-Line. This is the brown line for the CTA in Chicago as it passes through the Lakeview neighborhood, you can see here. And this is what it looks like underneath the tracks. And this area, as it passes through this neighborhood, is just used as a maintenance route for maintenance vehicles to come check on the structure and repaint it, maintain it. But it's also used as an informal walkway for the neighborhood. And a lot of people will walk to the train underneath the tracks, or come home from the train station underneath the tracks. And so the area we were asked to look at by the Lakeview Chamber of Commerce spans between a commercial district on the left, where there's a train station, and another commercial district that you see on the right, the Southport train station, and trying to find a way to create an art walk, a public destination, and a public walkway linking between these two stations over time. So we started this project in 2017, focused on this area in orange, looking at this first station on the far left and this other intersection with a major street on the right. Phone's ringing here. Hang on. All right, just hung up a phone. All right, so we were starting this project, and we were, it was community driven and community led, and they had, they came up with this idea as a community to create this art walk and garden, but they didn't have a chance yet to meet with the CTA or pursue the project so far to understand exactly what the train companies or the train maintenance, the Chicago Transportation Authority, would say was allowed to actually do underneath the train tracks. So when we first began the project and met with them, they said, you can do your art walk and garden underneath the tracks, but you can't have any lighting or power attached to the structure. You can't attach anything to the structure. You have to create 12-foot clear zones with no obstructions so we can continue to have our maintenance vehicles And at any time, we've been replacing the footings for the structure, where we come and dig out this entire area and put big concrete abutments underneath each of the structures. So you should stay as far away as possible from where the structure meets the ground. But other than that, you can do the art walk and garden. And so we were given these really pretty specific constraints about what we couldn't do. And so we devised a strategy to incorporate art that included these freestanding art panels that you see one on the left that are 8 feet by 8 feet, but that can be spaced distant from the tracks, and that can have integrated lighting, but also they're demountable and could go up and come down and have a rotating kind of art exhibition on them, but also illuminated by these freestanding light boxes you see on the right that are also 8 feet tall and that are programmable and linked together and kind of punctuate along the length of the walk to provide lighting for the murals, but also safe pedestrian lighting. And again, could be programmed by an artist to change over time and do different kind of art projects or displays in their own right. So during the daytime, it was the prior view, and then here you could see how these begin to illuminate the length of the path at night. And then we were able to propose changing some of the material underneath the tracks to delineate, a more friendly kind of walking surface than the huge crushed stone, but create these edges where the art and the light boxes would go. And so this was our first kind of concept and schematic design for this primary 3-block first phase. And so it included about a dozen of these art panels and light boxes that repeat in a rhythm along the length of the tracks. There's one spot where we get enough light to have a garden and plant some new trees, but this is another challenge of working underneath these tracks, that you can't get enough sunlight to grow very much. So you can see this one garden in the upper left as you approach the primary train station. And again, at night, you would see this as this illuminated route underneath the tracks through the neighborhood. And at the very end, so that was our kind of prototypical condition as you move underneath the tracks and what we call the path segments. And then this was the existing auxiliary or secondary entrance to the train station. So this is where everyone was walking to get to the Brown Line to take the train. And we were, part of our scope was to try to enhance this station and try to make it a place where people might spend a little bit more time, meet some friends coming to and from getting on the train. And we had to try to invent a kind of new set of furniture or a way to actually spend time underneath the train tracks that wasn't just kind of putting out some chairs, but that was considerate of trains overhead, things dripping off of trains, things falling off of trains, it just being a pretty harsh environment underneath. And so we ended up taking this kind of box form with a roof, again, to protect you overhead, integrate some lighting, but also try to create these kind of playful surfaces that would invite people to hang around and sit on them for a while, but not necessarily spend all day or night, but just trying to create a kind of warm, also wood and bright, vibrant yellow in contrast to the structure above. So we experimented with a lot of different shapes that would invite different kinds of social interaction or play, and worked with a company in Michigan to have these landscape forms to have these fabricated. And about this time, we knew we wanted to cover this canopy above. This was the existing CTA canopy with the one row of off-centered lights. We wanted to try to add lights and balance this out and cover it in some way. And we made it all the way through schematic design for the project with these, again, this idea of these boxes, some art and murals on the wall, and that we would screen the lighting canopy above. And we had a really modest budget for this. And the mayor of Chicago at the time sent out on Twitter, once we published some of these images, that Mayor Emanuel was really excited for the project and that it's moving forward and that construction would begin. And this changed everything that we had planned. We were getting ready to issue the construction drawings. We were working to have the boxes fabricated, the yellow seats. But for everything else, from the new ground surfaces, the new screen above for the lighting and the art panels and walkways, he volunteered for the Chicago Transit Authority to help aid in construction of the project. So it went from us sending it out to bid to contractors to then it being a lot of the work performed by the actual CTA, which changed everything. And now it became a public-private, collaboration with the Chicago Transit Authority to change one of their stations. But ultimately, that allowed us to do, they were much more comfortable with a lot of the things we were proposing because they were going to execute some of them themselves. So we were able to do much more with the cladding, the canopy above the space. And then they helped the installation of the new yellow seats that you see here and the new concrete walkway and access. So to look at each of these seats, each of them is a take on a different kind of outdoor furniture. So this is our take on the picnic table, and then this is kind of a wavy bench. And then this is the vendor kiosk. So in the morning, local businesses will come sell pastries or coffee as people are on their way. And then they also are kind of, again, they invite play. So people are kind of climbing on these things. That's the vendor kiosks. When there's not a vendor there, people are climbing on them or in them. And then of course the mayor came back to cut the ribbon when construction was finally complete. But we've been watching this on Instagram, which has been pretty fun because they are behaving in a way that we hoped, which is inviting people to engage them in their own way. And the one in the middle is pretty great with the concert. And then there's some photo shoots on the right. And then Augustine was actually here for this. I had gone home right before this, but they saw this creepy Pennywise clown there one night also.
There was a Halloween night.
Yes.
It was very freaky.
Yes. I had to include that for you, Augustine. I'm glad I left before that happened. So here's a kind of final look at that phase one of construction, now complete. And then then at the other end, we were able to get some of the art panels in. So here's 4 of these, and every 3 months, a different artist paints a new series of murals on these. And then in the walkways, we have some of the lighting, the light boxes in, and these are being tested right now. And the murals, the rest of the murals on the walkways are going in, or the art panels rather, are going in this summer. So we're slowly working piece by piece to push this project, but it's very low budget, again, for a community group who helped, like the Friends of the Low-Line, the Lakeview Chamber of Commerce, who really are kind of passionate in pushing this project through fundraising and approvals with the city. And it's hopefully when it's complete, it'll be it already is a very unique, especially in Chicago, there isn't anything like this where you're walking underneath the train tracks rather than, riding above. And this is the one area I explained earlier that has the trees where we can actually plant some trees. So this is part of the next scope of construction that hopefully this summer we'll have a bigger garden along the walkway in one place we actually can get some light. So that's the low line. So that's an example of a pretty strategic and tactical way to figure out how to occupy the space beneath the train tracks. The next one is another kind of surplus space project in a city that I want to talk through, and this is called Oval Plus, and this is in Philadelphia. So the Oval is this area you see on the left, and this is looking at a plan of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway in Philadelphia. So huge Beaux-Arts parkway with 10 lanes of traffic culminating in a big oval with some fountains and a parking lot, and then a big museum of art with the big steps. These are the steps that Rocky Balboa runs up, in Rocky. They're known as the Rocky Steps. You all are probably too young to know what I'm talking about, but that's okay. So this is the big oval surrounded by 5 lanes of traffic on all sides, gigantic parking lot, and the art museum. And this is what the parking lot looks like on the right most of the time. But in the summer, they have a program where it's called Summer at Eakins Oval, and the Fairmount Park Conservancy hosts an event for 5 weeks where they'll transform this parking lot into a temporary public park. And it's a way to engage, invite anyone who's visiting Philadelphia who lives near the park or near Eakins Oval to come and enjoy public space. And it proves how viable of a public space this could be if it wasn't a parking lot most of the time of the year. So we were asked in 2017 to design the summer installation for 6 weeks in the parking lot and the rest of the Oval. And rather than it just being a pop-up kind of project where there's food trucks and movies and classes and events, we wanted it to become more of an engaging, a way to engage the community and engage visitors about what the Parkway and the Oval could be long-term. You know, currently it's overscaled, it's very car oriented, and it's a kind of outdated version of civic space, you know, from last century. And our thoughts were, what does Philadelphia want this parkway to be, and how can we gather that information and invite people here to have some fun, but also talk about the future of the parkway. So we themed it, "What's Your Parkway, Philly?" And that's what you see here on the sign, and designed an area for food trucks and gathering, but also a series of rooms along the parking lot that would talk about the history of Fairmount Park, the arts and culture of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway in Philadelphia beyond, and then a yellow kind of dialogue room where you could be interviewed or talk about what you would like to see for the future of the parkway, or what the parkway, you know, means to you currently. And then under the trees, there's big game areas and beer gardens and other activities. So here's we created these temporary, you know, pavilion and wrapped kind of columns that define these rooms. So you see the Parkway for Culture, for Dialogue. Here's a zoom of the Parkway for Nature that talks about the history of the Parkway and Fairmount Park, where this resides. And then the Arts and Culture, you know, I guess as a sandbox, but places to hang out, and these are illuminated at night and lots of games. And then you really see all of the exhibition framed by the classes and movies and activities that still happen all around it for this 6-week period. But from taking this opportunity to really not just think of this as you know, they'd done this 3 or 4 years before 2017. And this was the first time that we really tried to analyze and hear from people. You know, where are people coming from? Are you coming here with kids? What would you like to see here? And we were able to collect a lot of data. And so we found out that 45% of people that lived in the neighborhood were coming over with kids. 57% of the rest of Philadelphia came with kids, and 70% of people from around the region were coming with kids. We had a way to ping if a smartphone passed through the Oval. You know, there was no data shared, but it could register if a new phone came through. And there were 175,000, you know, phones that came through. So we know how many people were arriving. And so what this space had was this civic grandeur on the one hand, that it was really part of this civic district in Philadelphia with the big museums and large civic space, but it also had this kind of neighborhood quality of families and children. And this is a place where those kind of two public worlds convened. And the number one feedback we heard from everyone we interviewed and all the information that we gathered all summer was lots more play. And we were invited back the next year to design the new version, which we called, you know, More Park, More Play. And so here's the design for 2018, that instead of them being these pavilions that were defining these rooms for dialogue and exhibition and learning and discussion, it really became these venues for interacting and playing and enjoying the public space of the Oval. So this is what you see on the right is what we call like the big seat, and it was made of foam and wood, but it was really became this big couch where everyone was convening in the middle of the parking lot, and kids were climbing and jumping all over it. The light pink that you see is actually soft, you know, kind of couch foam that was coated like a Nerf ball. And then there was the ribbon pavilion where we were able to provide more shade in the middle of the parking lot. And, you know, at night, this was really brightly illuminated and blowing in the wind. But also, you know, during the day, again, a place where you could get out of the sun and sit underneath this with the breeze blowing through. And we also created a big misting pavilion, Mr. Mister, that you see here on the left, where you could run through and cool off. And then again, those are all illuminated at night and really created a kind of nice mood throughout the parking lot. So tons of people, tons of sand, tons of play. And the one thing we tried to do in 2018 that we didn't do in 2017 was, again, expand the scope from the Oval itself to really trying to think about how we could reclaim a little bit of the roadway down one of the side parkway areas down the boulevard. And so we were able to do that in 2018 to have some barriers installed and turn over some of the roadway to pedestrians and cyclists. And we had these kind of little follies along the way, this was a wayfinding, log with a permanent windsock pointing toward the oval. But there were performances along the way. But mostly in 2018, we saw this as it became an enhanced pathway and commuter route, but not a place where everyone was spending a lot of time. And so for our last time designing the oval, we, in 2019, really, instead of, again, focusing on just the oval, we really tried to expand the programming down the length of the parkway to, again, turn over the public street to public use. And this time with the theme of these different blocks taking on different activities. So we had play, hear, and make as you worked your way down, this really long stretch of the parkway. And we did that with a series of using these kind of yellow features to signal these different nodes along the way that would take the form of picnic tables linked together where you could have art classes or big places to have a food truck pull up and places to eat, but also these little rooms along the way where there were dance performances and classes, music classes. So lots more furniture, chairs, places to hang out in the shade, but also bikes passing through. Several places where you could play basketball or ping pong or tetherball, but really trying to occupy the street as much as we could. So those were the 3 years that we tried to really advance that project from just a kind of a very successful summer pop-up to something that became a tool to test ideas and learn more about what is possible so that it could be part of a campaign in the long term to try to make some of these ideas permanent, whether that's expanding the capacity to have permanent public venues, playgrounds, and places to hang out in the oval instead of a 200-car, football field size parking lot, or whether it's reclaiming some of these lanes down the parkway that are also already these beautiful tree-lined, parkways that you could spend time and use as a public space. So that was the goal, again, to really try to advance what's possible and start a conversation about that and campaign for it rather than just provide, that venue. So this summer, there is no plans for the oval, of course, as you can imagine, but it was a good 3-year stretch, and we'll see what happens next. And that comes to the third and final project. It's actually a couple projects, but tied together in South Knoxville, Tennessee, and a series of projects we've been working on for about 5 years in South Knoxville. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Knoxville, Tennessee, this is where the University of Tennessee is, and it's on the Tennessee River. It's about 300,000 people in the metro area, with downtown, historic downtown on the river. Again, here's the university. And then South Knoxville has this really kind of post-industrial legacy. It used to be a place where a lot of textiles were manufactured and where there were a lot of mines for marble. Tennessee, they mine this, it's actually limestone, but they call it Tennessee marble, but it's very pink in color. And so if you ever see a pink limestone or pink marble clad building, it often came from Tennessee. And this was a major place where that was mined and quarried in the early 20th century. In the 1980s, the city and the Tennessee Department of Transportation wanted to build a highway that would link downtown Knoxville through South Knoxville, all the way through these kind of foothills of the Smoky Mountains down to another interstate highway that was being constructed, that already was constructed rather, south of the city. And in the 80s, they were going to phase the construction of this project and ended up only building this first stretch of the parkway. And so when you look at an aerial, you'll see this highway comes from downtown, crosses the river, snakes through the South Knoxville neighborhood, and then stops at an exit ramp in a dead end right here, instead of continuing where it was going to go. After they halted construction, a group of outdoor enthusiasts and mountain bikers knew that it was imminent that one day this land would be taken over for the highway, and that it didn't have any value, but that it would be a great place in the meantime to hike and mountain bike and preserve wildlife and do all these outdoor recreation activities. And so for the next 20 years, all of these different venues, first beginning with this, what they're calling the Baker Creek Preserve, but this whole, what they call the South Loop, is an area where it has grown over the last 25 years to become one of the premier outdoor recreation and mountain biking venues in the United States. And all of this started because they stopped building a highway that would have changed all of this land. And so now this whole area together is called Knoxville's urban wilderness. And so if you look up the urban wilderness, this is this whole area in southwest Knoxville and southeast that together is this big outdoor recreation destination that grew up over time. The west side is anchored by what's called the Battlefield Loop, and that's closer to downtown and the University of Tennessee. We were first introduced to this when we were invited by an architecture practice, Sanders Pace Architecture, to come to Knoxville to help a foundation that they were working with come up with a strategy for preserving, enhancing, and making public this whole land, the 600 acres of land that you see in the yellow. It was kind of informally called the Battlefield Loop, and it was made up of a number of really great outdoor spaces, like an historic Civil War battlefield sites, and an abandoned quarry lake, and some amazing bluffs that overlook the river 200 feet down. But all of these great outdoor venues, none of them, a couple of them had parking lots, none of them were connected to one another, and many of them were under threat from development by encroaching apartment complexes for students that you can start to see in the lower left that were beginning to bite into and chew up this really valuable and beautiful habitat. And so the Aslan Foundation asked us to try to come up with a framework for connecting and enhancing and kind of defining this area so that there could be a strategic master plan or framework for how to invest in it over time and preserve it. So the sites across the 600 acres are disconnected from one another, but really very charismatic. So here's the bluff on the left overlooking the river. There was 4 historic, again, battle sites from the American Civil War in the mid 1860s. And then this is the quarry where they mined limestone on the right that they stopped mining in the 1970s, turned off the pump, and it filled up 200 feet deep with water. And so we looked at this 600 acres, and your first inclination sometimes is to try a strategy of a kind of top-down master plan where you just, connect the dots and think, okay, if there's this Civil War site here, there's this lake here, there's this overlook here, and a road here, let's put a parking lot and connect the dots. And you end up with a kind of top-down approach of applying circulation and strategy to a land that's actually, again, very diverse and has a lot of different distinct habitats, and that requires a lot more of a sensitive strategy. And so what we tried to do was we conducted a lot of research with stakeholders and researched different stakeholders to try to identify who was already using this currently and how and why, and who might use it in the future and how and why. And we started with these groups, for example, like a bird watching group. So there were lots of bird watching groups in Knoxville, and they want to see certain species of birds. And you see some of them on the left. The different species of birds occupy some of the different habitats that you don't find all the way throughout the 600 acres, but only in certain areas. So we identified those habitats where bird watchers would be most inclined to go, and then walked the site with a GPS device, sometimes on trails, sometimes not on trails, sometimes just trying to find your way. But this is what came out on the right, was a map of the route that was walked, trying to link together the different bird watching destinations. Another route was recreation and fitness. If you were going to come to run 5 kilometers, where would you start and end? Or if you wanted to do a 1-mile walk, where would you start and end? So these are different circuits for recreation and fitness groups. And we did dozens of different, recreation groups and dozens of outdoor exploration, fishing, bird watching groups. And then also if culture and community groups. So if you're coming there as an art destination, or to see a performance in an amphitheater, or if you wanted to see the different Civil War sites, how would you walk between them? And after walking about 150 of these different routes for different reasons, it resulted in this plan that we never would have drawn if we just started to try to connect the primary dots. If we would have just tried to link the lakes or link, to maybe the most convenient point of access. This bottom-up plan emerged from walking the landscape in response to the different desires of different current and future user groups and why they would be coming to this space and what they would want to experience. So what this told us was really important, both in the location of circulation and how you would move throughout. But if you look more closely, what you start to see in the lower left is that you're actually going to have the largest possible overlap of people there for the widest or most diverse set of reasons. So you would see on the left someone who was there from the education and exploration group, someone there from the recreation and fitness group, and someone from the arts and culture group are all going to be using this one primary path to try to get to a set of spaces where they might branch off. And there's many areas where you might just see an education exploration route where only a bird watcher would ever go, but there's plenty of routes that you would see this real huge overlap in people arriving and moving through the space. And what that told us was, we need a parking lot here, we need trailheads over here, we need wider pathways here that are made of more robust materials so that you can get maintenance vehicles and you can make room for the volume of people that are moving through it. Here's where we would locate a bridge, here's how many people would probably be using it. So it gave us a lot of information from doing this exercise that really informed the plan. We were letting that information emerge rather than apply that top down. And we were able to go to the next level of detail and begin to say, okay, if this is a spot where these different trails are converging, this could become a node or a rest spot, or this could become a primary entrance point or an access point. And all of those have certain metrics associated with them. So this is the same drawing. I'm just flipping it to the next level of detail that we were able to draw it up. And so when you can note something on a plan like new connector bridge 6 feet wide, well, that also has a price tag associated with it. So we're able to quantify all of these terms, whether that was, again, trailhead, bridge, bench, wayfinding, new kayak launch, new parking lot, and put together a planning strategy that had a budget for all of these and allowed us to work with the client and the city to prioritize how you would make choices about which comes first, how much to invest where, and how to invest and phase this over time. So at the end, we had this framework plan, and it has 46 kind of projects noted on this. Some of those projects are just where you would put a sign, a trailhead, or a place where where one trail enters the 600 acres, while others could be $1 million investment in the lakefront, for instance. So it was a really interesting process for us to get to know Knoxville, get to know the urban wilderness, and work on this 600 acre areas in a way that we hadn't had the opportunity to work before. And what emerged from that as a priority project was Quarry Lake. This abandoned quarry that I was describing kind of came to the top of the list because the public had already been using it. So here's an image quickly. The public was already using the quarry as an informal swimming venue, and it's publicly owned, and it's open certain times of year. But as you can imagine, it can be somewhat dangerous, and it's not accessible. There's no bathrooms. It's really very much an informal venue. And if we go back in time, you can see on the left, when the quarry was operating in the late 1970s, you could see it's a 200-foot deep hole. And then now on the right, it's all grown up with 40 years of trees and 200 feet of water. And it looks like this now, where you could see where the dump trucks would drive down this ramp down to the water and would circulate around the perimeter when it was in use. But that ramp now becomes this access point where you could walk down here into the shallow water, and that's how it's used informally. And so this is publicly owned, and we were going to go through a public process for the project. And we like to do public events where we're not sitting in a gymnasium, talking about a project with a slideshow, but try to do more engaging exhibitions or conversations like you saw with the Oval project prior. And we unfortunately with this site, because it's not accessible and because there's no bathrooms, it made it impractical to host a community event there. But what we were able to do was gain access to a bakery that was being refurbished under construction not far away, and create a kind of scale plan of the whole quarry on the quarry floor. And we hosted a kind of exhibition and community event where you were invited to come walk through around the lake and look at photos of the views that you might see standing in different locations. We recorded a bunch of interviews. There were postcards that had checklists or questionnaires for people to leave feedback, but you might come to a station that pointed out all the different views overlooking the water and then what that view might look like. And it gave everyone a chance to talk about what they love most about this place or what they would like to see here as we think about enhancing access and use, safe use of the lake. So from that engagement process, we designed ultimately, the plan you're looking at now with a new parking lot, an access road, and kiosk, and then an accessible ramp and pier down into the water. And so that's kind of what this was part of the schematic package that we designed in 2016. Here's the pier going out into the lake. And this is where the dump trucks used to turn around. And we used that as a basis for designing the parking lot that is there now and that just recently opened phase 1. So there's the parking lot up there above the quarry, the accessible path coming down. And we're beginning phase 2 now to work on the ramp down to the water. And that brings me to the very last project, also in Knoxville. So we've been in the Battlefield Loop on the left, but if we go back to the dead-end highway that started all of this, you can see that's where it was built, in the yellow in the 1980s, and then it was halted. The city issued a request for proposals and qualifications to try to create a formal entry point to the really successful South Loop recreation out and mountain biking and outdoor adventure area that you see here. So this whole circuit of orange, as I described, developed ad hoc over time, and it never had a master plan. It never had a strategic plan that guided investment over time. It was really built by individuals without that, and it's very successful, but it's very easy to get lost. There's no front door, and it's hard to plan ahead. And we were asked to look at where the highway dead ends, at this little stretch of land from where the highway dead ends to where this main entrance point, if we could try to create a main entrance point out of that. And we would call it, it's to be called the Urban Wilderness Gateway or Gateway Park project, to create a front door to this venue. And so here you can see the highway. So downtown Knoxville is back here. The highway snakes through South Knoxville South, and then it comes to this bridge. And it looks like it's a tunnel or that it goes underground, but really it just stops. It's a dead end right here at that roadway. But when you look the other direction, you see the dead end. And then this is where all the mountain biking and outdoor recreation and areas begin right here. So we were trying to look at this site linking between the dead end highway and the preserve. And when we started to look at this and go through the first phase of master planning, we really started to feel that this whole highway, this whole parkway that was overbuilt, and that we could use that surplus area to imagine that this parkway becomes the park itself, that the park isn't just this little gateway moment at the end of the highway, but that it would create access from downtown and all throughout the neighborhoods in South Knoxville as one singular gateway that you could arrive to and circulate through, and that the whole highway could become the gateway to the park. And so when we thought of it, it expanded from just this one little area at the bottom to really 113-acre park with numerous crossings anchored by downtown and the preserve. And so you see this, our plan on the left just has this little zone below the bridge where we were initially focusing, but we went on to master plan the entire length of the highway, which included consolidating the 2 lanes of traffic onto the other side. So instead of having 4 lanes, our proposal was to have the lanes on the left side of the image go 2-way, and then take over the lanes on the right to become a linear park. So you could imagine keeping the area at the bottom of the image as a parking lot and repurposing the highway for parking at the kind of beginning of the Gateway Park experience. But then after that, you could ride your bike to and from downtown on a former highway. So we developed that for the framework plan, and from that emerged phase one, which comes back a little bit to the original scope. So in the long term, the goal is to create this 2-mile linear park, but under construction right now is this first phase that it does extend north of the overpass a little bit to create that parking area I described, but that the overpass really becomes this transition from urban to wild on the site, how we proposed it. So here you see the parking lot and this underpass. And we developed this underpass to really play up this idea of, you know, road construction and orange barrels and the history of the car and the interstates, and how this kind of dead-end project now has created this new urban wilderness in Knoxville. So on the one side, it's still highway roadbed that we've striped and created a little recreation area, but then underneath the overpass, there's these orange, you know, climbing boulders and swings and a pavilion with a trailhead and welcome station and bathrooms. But once you cross through to the other side, so here's arriving on the highway side, passing under the threshold of the underpass, and then you emerge on the other side in the wilderness with rock slides and different materials, and really this leaving the city back on the other side of the underpass. And then that continues with a new greenway that links all the way back to the mountain biking trails and other outdoor recreation venues, with a new lawn and picnic pavilion there at the base. And so here you see the sloped lawn, picnic pavilion. And as part of this process, again, we wanted to host a community event, but this time we were able to actually convince them to do it on site. We just had to figure out how we could have permission to close off the end of the highway, but we hosted a really big block party on the end of the highway itself as a way to invite the community to share their ideas during our process. So we started blocking off the road with a really precise cone array as a stopping point on the highway. And then we designed this 50-foot model of the project. I guess it was matchbox scale, so that, you know, kids could come and drive Hot Wheels on it, but anyone else could come and just talk about the project and understand the scale of it and what it was connecting. And there was a little hole that you could climb through to drive your cars. And it just became a kind of centerpiece. It had to be very big in order to fit, you know, to hold the presence of this gigantic interstate. And the second event we did was looking at the underpass itself, and we created a big rendering that we then transferred onto 2 big prints that would hang as over the threshold of the highway or of the underpass, so that when you arrive to the event, you pass through a 1-to-1 rendering of what the underpass would look like in the future. So you can see when you stand here, the perspective of the rendering aligns with your view under the bridge. But then as you approach, you really just walk through the gap in these 20-foot tall or 16-foot tall posters. So currently phase 1 is under construction right now, this whole area. It's just at the beginning, so you can see on the right some of the grading of the pathway linking back to the lawn, and the greenway and bike path going in on the left. And then they just recently completed grading of the large lawn. So you see the rendering on the left of that, and then where that lawn will be on the right. But it's a little bit early. These large public space projects take many years, as you can see from all of these projects started in 2015, 16, 17 or so. So that's where it currently stands. And that's the end of the 3 stories. So I'll stop there and welcome, you know, any questions you may have, and appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Hold on. Anyone has a question that would like to have from a room, because my daughters have just will begin her class.
Glad it's not just me.
Okay, so that's okay. Now I'm live. Okay, so anyone would like to ask Andy something about the talk? There was just a question about the oval project. How do you deal with accessibility? Well, car accessibility in the oval project. and I'm not quite sure about what this person was referring to, but I think, how do you deal with this idea of I might think about how do you get the cars into the overall project?
So for the Oval project, I guess to maybe just respond to the role of cars. I mean, the issue currently is that it's very, very overscaled. You know, that this area was built in the 1920s with, you know, 11 lanes of traffic and all this parking, and it's not very pedestrian friendly. It doesn't function well. It's overused, but it just has this big monumental kind of civic presence in the city, and there's the way people, what individuals want out of the city and what opportunities there are in the city for, you know, civic and community life, just it are moving away from this idea of 11 lanes of traffic constituting, you know, good urbanism. And so yeah, it's kind of been something where we're not proposing to can't close the roads forever or take away cars forever, but that certainly there's a large percentage of space that could be given over to pedestrians from cars, and everything would still function well, except it would be a much more enhanced public space for people walking and on bikes. I don't know if that answers the question, but there's room there to spare. We're not proposing to get rid of everything in the long term.
Okay. So I would ask the next question about how the pedestrians get into the oval.
Yeah. So currently it's a disaster. Yeah. So I'm trying to find an overview if you can see a little bit. So currently there's like one crosswalk and one stoplight. You can kind of see it at the bottom of this image. And that's really the primary access point. There's one more crosswalk. Let me go up. I think there's one more image. But the answer is it's not good. Again, it's overpowered by cars. So here you can see a crosswalk by this bus on the upper right. And you can see, I guess there's one more on the upper right, upper left, and then one at the bottom. But these are very big crosswalks. Traffic moves very fast through here. The crosswalks don't change for minutes at a time. It's really not very friendly. And part of the long-term ideas that have been explored for what this could become either demand that, yes, there's less lanes of traffic encircling it, or that there's some kind of a bridge or a tunnel or other ways through it that would encourage more successful mobility. But the crosswalks don't work very well right
now. Okay, I'm going to read a question about the Knoxville project. It says, I found the analysis of the Knoxville Battlefield Loop project very interesting. The area it covers is huge, and the work your studio did was wonderful in terms of mapping human behavior, routes, points of interest. I think it's also interesting to hear about the time and the process that the film took to reach the level of conclusions that you're presenting. Could you tell us a little bit more about the challenges or problems you encountered in starting this analysis process? Maybe there were none. I'm just curious about hearing the rough process of it, if possible.
That's a really good question. And thank you for the feedback. And it's a very good question. You know, I think part of our struggle with beginning this process, you know, we had never done this before, this bottom-up strategy. And I think it emerged from not knowing where to begin. And going exactly to your question, you know, we were looking at this amazing landscape with these destinations. And as I said, the kind of critique of, you know, one approach was certainly to figure out what these, you know, major moments or environments were, and how to put a big parking lot there and allow people to get there and get from one to the next. And it was just our hunch that we wanted to try to do something really different and try to think about. We were really concerned. You've all heard the phrase of, like, you know, you build it and they will come. That if you just invest a bunch of money in a place and enhance it and make it nice, you know, everyone will come show up and use it. And sometimes that's true, but we were worried about this space, this foundation we were working for. What if they invested all of this money in enhancing this place and nobody came, and there wasn't anything that captured anyone's attention, or that we made the wrong assumption about why anyone would come here. Because as I said, some people come here to walk around in some of the really picturesque spots, but there's other spots where this is it's more of a preserve, and there isn't a lot of activity. And some people come swim at the lake, but who knows how many more people would come if it was safer or more enhanced. So we just had so many questions at the beginning. There were a lot of unknowns, and that's what led us to try to understand more about who are we talking about when we say people or visitors or guests. It's like, who are they? And that really prompted us to not just drill down into trying to figure out who they might be, but exactly, where they would arrive from and where they would go. So it'll be really interesting to see in the long term as some of these projects are built over time. I mean, this is a kind of 10-year framework, how some of our strategies are, if we can come back and evaluate those, I think we'd learn a lot from that.
There's another question. I think you already answered it, but I'm going to add my question. It's, when do you estimate to finish the Knoxville Battlefield Loop? Or I'll change a little bit the question. I mean, if you have a little bit of the estimate, that would be nice. But do you think these kind of projects have an end?
I don't think they have. That's a good question also. I think so for us, we were lucky enough that the priority project that was identified from the Battlefield Loop was the Quarry Lake project, and that we were poised and a good fit for that project. Where it says Log Haven here on the bottom of this image, that if you all should look up Log Haven Artist Residency. The same foundation, working with Sanders Pace Architecture, the architects that invited us to Knoxville, they just have completed one of the most incredible artist in residency programs in the country. And a lot of people don't know about it yet because it just came online, but that has several buildings and all these 1930s era log cabins that have been restored to be artist residences and studios, and that they're going to rotate artists through. But the reason why I'm making this point is that we identified so many projects. Let's throw out the number 46. I mean, that's kind of a crazy amount. That was, like I said, some of those are that was our internal, and that was a bench, but let's say there's maybe half a dozen, 6 or so really good, meaningful, like investment projects that could be prioritized in here. Those will take about 10 years, but one of them that's already taken 5 or 6 is this artist residency. And that's by, architects and not us. And we were just trying to create a framework that would allow the foundation and the city to have a guide for making decisions about how to move forward. And I think another part is a lot of this, nothing will happen to it. That it's going to be, even if there was just a trail, or even if it just remains something to look at from afar, as long as it doesn't turn into apartment complexes, this will have been a success in that way too. So it's a really complex area, and we just try to synthesize and make clear as much information as we can so that we can make good decisions.
Good. Anyone else has a question? Diana, Agustin?
I would like to just mention something that we discussed several times with Andrew and the rest of the core team. That is super important, and it's something that in Mexico we are not familiar with these kind of strategies. Is the way that how you socialize and communicate the projects. This is an amazing way to get to the people, to really know and understand what's going on. So these events and these models and these kind of situations that you create to gather all these people and get interested and very well informed about the project, it's really important. I mean, as we discussed it before, in Mexico we don't do that, and we should start doing that because of this lack of these kind of strategies of how to communicate and socialize the projects. Important projects like the airport in Mexico City can be easily voted against and gone. And it's incredible amount of money that is invested in this kind of project that can be gone for a political reason. So this is really, really important for clients to understand that it has to be communicated in this way. So one project that is socialized, it's impossible that with a voting in the community, a politician can get rid of these projects, no? So I think this is something that in Mexico we need to understand and try to implement in all public projects and also private projects. But in this scale, you need to socialize. You need to do this. It's kind of a mandatory thing. So just a comment for the rest of the audience.
Sure.
I have also a comment, question. Well, first, thank you for an exciting trip through your project. It was really, really good. And for me, it's always refreshing to see the way the projects are socialized, but also the way your projects are developed. It's really interesting. But I think we are on a period where we are facing fundamental questions on how we face challenges, how we face projects, how we develop strategies, and also how we envision the future that we aim to change or impact. How do you think that your practice will change after the COVID?
Sure. You know, on the one hand, I really feel like one of the main conversations that's coming to the front of this is the need for public space, not even just great public space, but more public space. I mean, in Chicago in particular, it's been really interesting. You know, the mayor closed the whole lakefront park system, which is the largest and most kind of equitable, like accessible, huge park system in the city. And I mean, granted, you could bring that back, but I guess it's going to be really interesting to see how public spaces are occupied as we learn more and get through the peak of what we're dealing with globally. And I think some of the things that might be happening are some really good and new habits for getting outside and seeing one another and from a safe distance, but like getting outside, walking, taking in the city. I think that it's amazing how many people are out and about right now. I hope that doesn't go away, and just that kind of enthusiasm for getting out and moving and seeing one another could carry on and instigate the support and interest in more and better funding for and creation of public space. And then second, I love what's happening around the world with shutting down some of these streets. Like, I wish they would shut down, you know, my street, my neighborhood. You know, it doesn't necessarily need to be permanent or infrastructural. There's a lot of places that are just, you know, putting a barricade at the end. And if you change your mind, you can, but it's such a great experiment the different cities are doing right now that it would just, anything we can do to move urbanism and cities toward the human and away from the vehicle, I think would be a really good outcome. You know, it's not going to change the world, but I think right now there's some really good trends emerging toward the appetite for public space and the appetite for diminishing the car a little bit. So those are two things that I hope, you know, we have experience and interest and have explored, you know, both of those things in some of our work, you know, work we shared today that include taking over lanes of highways for linear parks or, you know, closing, you know, the parking lot or, you know, to make it a park. So those are ideas that we've tested and think have a lot of interest, but it's just who in the long run is funded and supported, and it's going to take the community, like Augustine was saying, I think also to really become a champion for these kinds of transformations. So that's something we hope to see in the future.
Hold on. I have to put on my glasses. There's another question here for you. There's this question about if the pandemic has changed the plans for Knoxville.
For the Knoxville?
Is it
Knoxville?
I think so.
Or the Oval? Or
no, I think it would be the Knoxville. Sorry.
Oh yeah, not yet. You know, that one was already under construction. So it was funded. You know, we completed the construction documents and it was funded, and construction has already begun. And so far they've been able to safely carry out construction in this big outdoor area where everyone's distant from one another, and it hasn't seemed to have been that's been okay. And a lot of cities are struggling financially right now, and I think part of since the project was already funded and contractors were already hired and the money is effectively already spent, I think has kept it going. So we hope that that'll be complete, and again provide just another venue for giving some people a place to go outside. I think the long-term vision of getting the highway transformed and connecting back to downtown, that's something we've always known was going to take additional funding and a lot of time to discuss with the Department of Transportation exactly how to implement. And so that's something that we hasn't been slowed down by this, because we know that was going to take a long time anyway. So we hope it goes there. If Knoxville can do that, it's going to be something that we haven't really seen before, to take a highway that looks like this and have it look like this. That would be nice.
There's another question. Aside from giving more social occupancy in the projects, though, these projects have any program about about sustainability? Are they well? I mean, because it might be like usual for you thinking about sustainability, but sometimes we need to listen to the word sustainability to really understand that it's already in your mindset and in your project.
Yeah, right? Sure. Right. Yeah, we don't, I guess we don't mention it much, but it is a part of nearly all of our projects in one way or another. I mean, I think you're looking at an image right here that, as far as sustainability, what the inherent difference already is between 4 lanes of highway and 2. So it's kind of built into this project, creating multimodal transportation and reducing hardscape and reducing reliance on the automobile. And then of course, sourcing local, landscape, trees, and habitats, and restoring habitats and creeks. It's all part of this project. We just don't usually lead with the sustainability piece, but it's important to all the things we do. The Low-Line, project that I shared at the beginning, it's a little bit more challenging to talk about sustainability in that context. But we look at it more again of making a city stronger, strengthening, creating a neighborhood, walkable destination that's oriented around trains and trains and like mass transit. It's already a project that's built around, mass transit and alternatives to the car. And of course, with the Oval, it's a project that where we're again proposing to get rid of parking lots, close lanes of traffic, and whatever we can do to make that, more permeable and more sustainable and less heat island, all of the above. So I understand the question. I think that, yeah, I didn't really mention it at all in any of these 3, but they are really, those strategies are usually typically part of the project, but don't drive the project, I guess.
Have you ever had any other experience besides projects in the U.S.?
Just
No. I mean, that you have been like design already a project, or I don't know if it's in process, because it usually takes ages being a.
Yeah, not yet. It's something that we started the firm. It's been what's pretty interesting about our practice, I guess, is that we set out to focus on public space, and it turns out that public space is one of the hardest types of things to build. It takes the longest. It's public. It's volatile, and it comes with a lot of challenges. And I think we still consider ourselves very, very, very much early on what it's taken to even earn these projects and build credibility and build trust, all the things that you need for a municipality or a public entity to trust you and hire you and pay you to do work and sustain your office. So for us, we've continued to expand where we're working, from Chicago and Philadelphia to then this work in Knoxville, and we worked in Kentucky, we've worked in Ohio, we've worked in Colorado. It's kind of in New York, but it's our goal is to practice internationally, but it's just we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
So,
So any other question or comment? All of you? No? Okay, so I would like to thank Andy then for sharing us this time and presenting these projects, which, I mean, he was really curious because the very first email I sent you, I remember it was, can you talk about tactical urbanism? And you just answered with this, like, I had already a thing on my mind, and you was like, okay, with this thing, I can go 3 different ways.
Yeah.
So, and you did. Thank you very much. It was really, really nice to have this presentation, to have this talk. And I would like you to invite you, when possible, whenever possible, to come to Querétaro and giving a live presentation and go to the studios and the whole thing. Probably.
I would love that.
I know you like coming to Mexico. I know Agustin is a very good host in San Miguel. But well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing us your time and sharing all the projects. And thanks everybody else, everybody for stay tuned and looking at this presentation. Thank you for the questions. And if you can, please give a clap. There's a way of giving claps and with your screen. So thank you very much, Andy, and thank you very much, all of us who have been at the project. So take care. Stay home. Stay healthy. Stay kind.
Yes, same to everybody, and I appreciate everyone's time and questions. This was really fun, and yeah, would love to do it in person sometime. So all the students and professors out there, good luck finishing the semester.
Thank you.
Same to you.
Okay.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.